Right. Hi, everyone. We're this session for high density housing presented by Derek McGregor is going to begin. Take it away, Derek.
Hurry up, Jet. Take your seat. Good morning, everybody. Um, Derek McGregor Dejnakaz. I am an infrastructure specialist with Wabnong Benjamin Association of First Nations, technical advisor. We'll let everybody kind of start settling in here. Eva, sit down. No worries. I just want to thank the First Nations Housing Conference for inviting me to speak to you guys today. They kind of just reached out to me blindly. Probably Keith here did, and asked me if I wanted to speak about anything. So I happened to be working on this particular stream at the time, so I felt it was pertinent to talk about it. So when I started it, it got to be pretty big PowerPoint presentation, very technical. And then I found out that I was on the agenda that I was on just before lunch on the last day. So I cut about 20 slides out because we'd be here all day. And I know you guys want to get to lunch and we want to go on. So it's an overview. So high density housing is a type of housing development with a higher population density than average. It's often made up of multi-story buildings such as apartments, condominiums, or townhouses, predominantly, but not inclusive to urban areas. So when we do an actual technical, if you Google or Wikipedia what's high density housing, it's like 6,000 people within 1 square acre. We're never going to get that for First Nations. So saying it's high density may not be the proper term. So I kind of want to change that a little bit in retrospect and say densification of First Nation housing, which I think is really important. So First Nations are considered rural areas. However, the benefits of high density housing is easily applicable to these areas. So when I was thinking about how I'm going to present this to you and really looking at my audience, I know it's going to be a lot of housing managers, not very technical. If I was speaking to a room of Keats, it'd be really technical. So, but we want to kind of keep it low key, just kind of give you a high level view of what we're doing. I also want to speak to you on this because it's not just a paper exercise that we've done. We've actually done this, and this is before the micro subdivision project come out from ISK. We've been working on this for about 5 or 6 years. And it's really something that was close to my heart when I work with my First Nations. And I'm a technical service provider. My job is to advise my First Nations on how best to deliver their services, whether it's infrastructure, roads, water treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants, but specifically housing development, because it's a big thing. So in Doki's First Nation, which is one of my First Nations, we did what's called cluster houses or high density. And we did it through the Rapid Housing Initiative with CMHC. Is anybody in here from CMHC? I was going to do some props to you guys. So I worked with a fellow by name of Keith Kiefer Miracle. And he really helped us flesh this out. So we started working on this back, I think, just beginning of COVID started, which got it halted. We were able to start right after COVID, which had a lot of challenges. And one of them being the cost of materials, right? We all went from cost per square foot, $250 a square foot, MUP, municipal unit price, to $350 a square foot, up to $500 a square foot. And I think some of you people in the housing, whether you're development or planning, realize this. So what are you going to do with that? Now, ISK, they bumped up their MUP, but it's not really enough to kind of capture all those extra costs for housing. Because remember, we're doing $400 to $500 a square foot, which is just crazy numbers, coming back from a background of $200 a square foot. But I'll get into those kind of costs later. So it's an eco village. So I took the design from European models, which is a circular. And it's a hub. So it's net zero capable. So there's two types of things of net zero. There's net zero certified, which is extremely difficult to achieve. So we kind of downgraded that to net zero capable. Does anybody here know what net zero means? You know? So essentially is you're leveling off your costs, right? So you're consuming equal amount of energy as you're putting back into the grid. Centralized services, and the cost of this project was $3.4 million. So the project parameters, we've got 8 units, including a hub's utility room. So what that hub's utility room is all our services come into one centralized location and then spoke out into each individual structures or houses. And that's just to minimize the space because we're just a tiny home project. So we don't want to have like a big mechanical room with all those kind of things. So we got one hub and then we supply all our hot water, electricity, plumbing to those 8 units. So that's so we utilized 3 full lots and they were deemed unusable by the First Nation. Geothermal heating supply. So we have a geothermal field. Centralized units, like we talked about, that hub. High efficiency units. So we built the whole things from SIPs, right from the foundation. So SIPs are structurally insulated panels, which are essentially 2 pieces of plywood with polystyrofoam in between. So we went above and beyond. Instead of using the standard 6-inch, we went with 8-inch. So it gave us a total R value of R50 in the walls and R80 in the ceiling. And we did the whole thing. So not only is it the foundation made out of SIPs, the walls are made out of SIPs, and the roof structure is made out of SIPs. Tiny home design, net zero capable, and engineered septic sewage treatment and disbursement system. And that last line is really important. And I know a lot of questions are going to come up on that. So just keep that in mind. So here is our development. So you can see that there are 6 smaller units. There's 4 double 2 beds and 4 single beds. The unit up there is our hub, which kind of goes from all the services coming to that and spoke out to each individual units. So the large blue rectangle is our geothermal field. So that pulls thermal energy from the ground into the units through heat pumps. See the orange down there? And this is really important. Pay attention to that. That is our septic system for the entire development. So if we had gone with, there's an engineered system, Aqualand system. If we had gone with this conventional tile and stone beds, we would be using about an extra 4 acres of land to do that. And it's not just the space, it's your nitrate treatment. So just that little rectangle there is our full septic system. And I'll get back to you. There's some of the science behind that, but later on. So this unit here is also facing south. So we're in the process right now of putting solar panels through the whole grid. And then once we do that, then it'll get really, really close to our net zero target. Why high density housing, or why are we going to densify our housing? And kind of borrowing from what Siva was working on, micro subdivision, I've been working in this field for about 12 years, and we've always talked about this. So we're just kind of making a realization now. So one of the key challenges First Nations have encountered is housing their people in safe, adequately sized homes and neighborhoods. Increased funding opportunities for expanding their housing stock with emphasis on shovel-ready projects have First Nations scrambling. The critical barrier to that is that we're exhausting our serviceable developed lots to accommodate new builds. Having a denser, tighter housing grid is beneficial as it will maximize the overall land and space usage, as well as providing better costs for subdivision and housing development. So because I'm a technical advisor, I work with housing managers and I'm in the communities a lot. And as I'm driving around and I'm working with a housing manager, you say, well, we want to build these houses, 6 or 7 houses or 10 houses, but we don't have anywhere to put them. And I'm driving around, I see all these spaces. Well, you can put a house there, you can put a house there, you can put a unit there, right? Well, we can't do that because we have nitrate treatment and people don't like living close to each other. But they don't understand how much it costs for each time you do an extension of your subdivision. It's millions and millions of dollars as well as time. So when we start out doing a subdivision extension, it could take up to 10 years from planning, feasibility studies, planning, construction, costing, all that stuff. So that's 10 years you have to wait in order to put your houses. But if you look around, you have a lot of usable land that's available to you. So some of the challenges, public perception, First Nation members desire wide open spaces. And when we started the RHI project in Doak East First Nation, and people, the locals seen that we're doing this really, putting 8 units in a small area, they did not like it. There was a lot of pushback. We heard this is a stupid idea. This has never worked, blah, 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 blah. And the locals didn't like it. But what we found was because most of our housing lists have a lot of people off reserve that want to come back to the reserve, they didn't mind living in close proximity. Like I live in Sudbury. I own a house in Sudbury. My neighbor to my left is 9 feet away. My neighbor to my right is 12 feet away. I'm used to it. And I came from Toronto. So I was living really close together. So I personally don't mind. So we're getting a lot of these off reserve members perfectly happy with this. So proximity of residents can create friction between tenants. How many here have multiplexes in their First Nations? Because you know that there's some social issues, right? Neighbors don't like their neighbors. They're complaining to the chief and council. So-and-so is doing this, so-and-so is doing that. So we hear a lot about that. So utilities access, driveways, hydro, septic. So who owns what, right? Who owns the driveways? Or how are you going to put the hydro to one unit? Septic is always a big issue. Noise and privacy. People like to live in a common area, right? Funding for projects. A lot of times they're funding just for houses. They're not funding for subdivisions. That's kind of separate. And sometimes the two don't really talk to each other. I work with First Nation housing. I work for housing public works managers and lands. And sometimes they don't like talking to each other. Engineering, a lot of when you start doing densification of housing infrastructure, you need to really lean on your engineering support. Approximation to First Nation services. What does that mean? That's like close to the band office, close to fire hall, close to these offices. So when you have a spread out sprawl, it's harder and harder to get to those services. Benefits. So lower development costs for infrastructure, and that's clearing and grubbing the lots, water distribution, electrical grid. Again, so I work with infrastructure as well, so we have to deal with all that. How are we going to get a road out there? How are we going to get our water mains and all this kind of fun stuff? We want to minimize sprawl. Instead of having taken up all our land and housing, let's bring that closer together. Phasing. Community planning is a big part of that. So if you're doing capital planning studies or comprehensive planning studies, you'll start noticing that your land base is being taken up with all these single detached homes. Increased opportunity for shovel-ready projects. We all know working with ISK that when they come down with the programs, it's like you got 2 months to start building, right? Well, if you don't have lots ready to go, you're going to have to wait a year to 2 years. But if you're going to tighten up your grid and you already have these in place, you're ready to go. Lower construction costs by developer and builders due to nearness construction area. So when your builders are not spread out across half a kilometer, they're right there in one little area. They can protect the area, make it secure with fencing, and just keep an eye on things. And you're not, wood and lumber and materials are not walking away. Anybody has any questions while I'm talking, just raise your hand. I'm okay with stopping what we're doing. So go ahead.
In no case, what were the tenants? What was the target audience for that project? Is that a like a lower income project market for rental?
Yeah, so that was more based on couch surfers. So we did it as one of the demographics that's often overlooked is single people or elderly couples, right? The children have left the home, the empty nesters. So it's just mom and pop. grandma and grandpa, just want a place to stay. And so this is what we kind of targeted. So good question, Jet, because when we talk about when we start planning for housing, we have to look at demographics. We have to look at how many single families, how many single moms, how many full families, how many elderly couples, right? So we just can't just start build targeting one demographic. We have to spread it out a little because our population is changing. So in this one particular one, it's just very simplified. I didn't go into the engineering or the architectural of a townhouse. So you see the red scale there, those are two townhouses. They're 3 stories high, full basement, main floor and upper floor. So it's actually two floors, still under part 9 of the building code. So we don't have to go into part 3, which makes things difficult. And they have stairs. So what we want to do is the demographic that we want to bring into there is usually young families. We're not going to be putting elders in here. So you can see the 2 units, and those are full units, and they have their own septic tank, right? And as it goes down here, I kind of had it cut off a little bit, but also then becomes our centralized aqua septic system, which would only take up for these units, maybe about 800 square feet is the size of the unit. So townhouse style units, 3 livable levels, 4 suites per building, per lot. So that means 2 buildings with 8 suites equals 16 bedrooms in totality, utilizing 30-meter frontage lots. 30 meters is roughly 100 feet. So because these units are 80 feet wide, we actually have enough room on either side and a setback of 10 feet on either side. Shared driveway and lane access to rear of property in a shared septic treatment system. So with these units here, we can kind of tuck them on either side of the property line, still get our setback, and then have enough room for a lane to access our maintenance system. Because when we put in these engineered systems, they need maintenance on them pretty regularly. So it's not like field bed you put in the ground. You don't think about it for 25 years. These ones you have to monitor and do testing at least once a month to just see what the nitrate levels are. So that's kind of my densification plan. And again, this is not just paper exercises. We are doing this right now in the planning stages in one of my other First Nations. So just to compare apples to apples, this is your conventional system that you would do on a lot, right? So you have your house, which is roughly 40 feet by 28 feet, which is common size, 1,100 square feet overall. Each unit to have 2 bedrooms and 1.5 baths. Roughing for additional bedroom in the basement area. So there's a full basement, laundry and mechanical room in the basement area. So you can see the size of your house compared to your size of your septic bed. This is designed by Canadian Shield Consultants, who I do a lot of work with. So this is accurate in scale. That's a big piece of land that you're using up for a field bed. Now, the fun part. As I know I can hear and talk to you guys about all day about this is a great idea, but I know most of you have to deal with numbers. So I put a cost comparison between the two, just to give you an idea what you can save. So my townhouse project, 2 units, overall is 4,480 square feet. And I put it at $500 a square foot. So my cost is 2.24 million. The site clearing, you still have to clear lots, right? Even though they may have been developed, you still got to go in and grub it out. So I put that at $20,000 per lot times 2, $40,000. Our services, driveway, well, water, and hydro, $35,000 per lot, comes out to $70,000. And our septic system, the aqua system that we've been using, runs about $70,000 for those 2 units. Because the one we just did in Dokis cost about $110,000. So putting on inflation, we said about $140,000 for those units. Gives us to a total cost of this project of $2.49 million, $2.5 million. So if I went with conventional housing which is what many of us do. So we have single detached houses, 1,100 square feet times 8 units at $350 a square foot. That's $3.136 million. You go into lot clearing, development, 8 lots times 20, 160,000. Your services, 8 lots, 35,000 per lot, 280,000. And your septic system, that's just your standard tile bed, $25,000 per tile bed, comes out to $200,000. So that's $3.776 million, give or take. This is just Class C estimates based on our experience. So let's put them side by side, right? So high density housing, project cost, 2.5 mil, conventional, 3.8 mil. Cost per unit, $311,000. Cost per unit for the conventional was $472,000. So if you project costing, green, take away the conventional, we have a shortfall of $1.286 million density compared to conventional. The unit costing is about $160,000 per unit. So these are real numbers that we are realizing that when we started doing these projects. We don't have as much resources in terms of funding to do everything that we want. So we really have to counter pennies, right? So in conclusion, First Nations generally have limited funds to develop housing projects. Every effort should be made to maximize available capital. Anticipated social issues because of people living in close proximity can be mitigated by strong housing policy and management. So that's important because I was talking to you guys earlier about First Nations don't like living close to each other, like our tenants. There's a lot of social issues. So when we do these projects, we actually do a sub housing policy so that we can make sure that people are kind of getting along. We have, if someone's a disturbance, then it's easier to evict them as opposed to going through that whole process. So we make the requirements a little bit stronger on that. Reducing your housing development project's overall footprint will enable you to maximize your available land resource. Again, going back to we have a hard time, even though the First Nations have significant amount of land, we don't have significant amount of developed land. And again, our lot development is sometimes 10 years in production. And if you don't have that ready to go, you're sitting on your housing. So miigwech, I went pretty quick. I thought I'd have less time or more time. So I'm an infrastructure specialist. There is my the organization I work for, Tribal Council, Wabnong Benjamin Association of First Nations. And there's my email. If anybody wants to ask me some questions later on down the road. Go ahead, Jet.
How does Wabnong classify as the different ownership categories by affordability? Like just like potentially low income, mid income, high income, like do you have those kind of classifications when you're looking at a community? When you look at their demographic?
Well, we don't really look at that per se. So we just have like a housing list based on numbers. But what we do is, for example, one of our First Nations in Nipissing First Nation, which is a very progressive First Nation, they're trying to get people out of their social housing into home ownership. So they have a really strong home ownership program. They actually are their own lenders. And so they do work with RBC, and I don't know if they deal with TD. Maybe you're going to be getting in there soon. So with Nipissing First Nation is they have their own home lending program. So they're trying to get people out of social housing into making and buying their own houses. Because a lot of people in First Nation, a lot of them make really good money. So it doesn't really make sense that they're staying in houses that, $400, $500 a month when they can afford more.
My next question, if you don't mind, how much demand do you see working with multiple nations at that whole ownership classification? You see a lot of demand there?
You're starting to see it now, quite a bit. Again, Nipissing First Nations, they do about 10 houses a year on their own, which are the home ownership program, and really nice houses. We're working on houses $750,000. And the good thing, and the thing about for Nipissing is they sell to each other. So somebody's maybe is outgrowing their big house on the lakefront. So they say, I want to move to a smaller unit. So they'll actually internally sell their houses, and the First Nation administers that on their behalf.
Last one.
Go ahead, no.
Do you know the bank limits them in any way?
The bank does. I think they cap it at 400,000 per unit per person for home ownership.
If they had 100 qualified buyers, then, like, would they be limited that way?
I think they cap it at 8 because the First Nation does underwrite that. Right. So they say we're only going to do so much. But yeah, they could probably do 20, 30 of them. There's so much demand there. That and subdivisions or road access. So they're going crazy, adding a kilometer, another kilometer, another kilometer. So it's a really built up place. Mr. Solomon. We'll just wait for the microphone so everyone can hear you, Greg.
Thanks for the presentation, Dirk. When constructing these high density units, what type of fire suppression do you have in place, and what type of products do you use for like the fire separation, fire rating on the exterior of the building envelope?
Well, now you're going to make me go into engineering, Greg. We always want to be close proximity to fire hydrants for as part of your fire suppression to make sure you have fire safety. But these are engineered design buildings. So we have party walls. Some people call them firewalls in between the units. We also go above and beyond the sound transmission. So a standard wall may be 50 sones. We'll put it up to 150 sones so that you don't hear your neighbor. And they'll go right up to the underside of the trusses. So you have that sound diffusion worked out. Well, we're hoping that we have enough time to get to it. So there's not a true firewall where one structure is on fire and it can fall apart and it saves the other, right? That's not a true, that's a firewall. We don't do that. We do call party walls unless we're doing like 6 units. Then after the third unit, then we have to put a firewall in. That's with a turret and all that stuff. But no, they're sound, they're fire safe. So we put like back it with rock solid insulation. We're doing 1.5 hour drywall, offset walls, all these kind of things. If you go in the building code under SB3, you'll see about 20 different ways to achieve that. Sir?
How do you justify building to net zero capable? Like, was that something the council wanted? And were there any incentives or anything that can push the decision further that way?
So I got 2 answers for that. One is because we're technical service providers, we're always trying to enhance our housing's performance, right? Building science. So we want to get to net zero capable as close as we can, even if it's a standard house. But why we did it specifically is when we were working with FNHC on the Rapid Housing Initiative, they gave us extra points for saying that. So, and it was a really good opportunity to just showcase. So I wasn't able to get the actual numbers from these units on how much energy they're pulling in, but it's not much because like I said, it's a really tight envelope. We're pulling a lot of heat from the ground, the geothermal. We do have a propane booster because as we know with in-floor heating and geothermal, there's a delay. So we have that system in place, propane driven for instant hot water demand. Also does the kind of boosts up the in-floor heating. So, but we're hoping once we get the solar panel array, we're in talks right now with FedNor and a couple of other stakeholders to electrify this with solar panels, selling it back into the grid, which would zero it out, hopefully, or get it close. Nope, ask away.
Oh, there we
There
go.
we go.
Was there a big financial analysis going to that decision? Like if there's payback periods for the upgrades and things like that?
Yeah, so that's the exercise we're doing right now is just to prove all those kind of things. So we're not just throwing a bunch of solar panels on these units without them doing anything. So we have to prove to FedNor that this is going to be cost effective over 20, 25 years.
Thank you.